Hey, stop scrolling for a second. What I'm about to tell you actually happened to a woman who scrubbed floors for a living. And by the end of this story, the same hands that once held a mop were shaking hands with people who never thought she'd survive the night. Something happened in that hospital room that no one, not even her employer's fiancé, expected to be witnessed. Stay with me. This gets unbelievable. Welcome back, friend. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from and which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Today's story is about loyalty, betrayal, and a secret that almost cost an innocent woman her life. It's heartbreaking, it's shocking, and by the end, you'll understand why some people are never really who they pretend to be. Let's begin. Nobody in that mansion knew her real story. Only that she never missed a day of work. Her name was Maria Alvarez, and for 6 years she had been the housekeeper for the Whitmore family, one of the wealthiest families in Charleston, South Carolina. Maria was 34 years old, a single mother raising her 8-year-old son Diego, on her own after his father left when Diego was just a baby. She lived in a small rented apartment across town, took 2 buses every morning to get to the Whitmore estate, and worked from 6 in the morning until the sun went down, sometimes later. Maria wasn't just an employee. Over the years, she had become something more to the family, especially to the youngest Whitmore son, Nathaniel. Nathaniel Whitmore was 38, the CEO of his late father's real estate empire, a man who had inherited more money than most people could imagine, but who had never inherited his father's coldness. Where his father had been calculating and distant, Nathaniel had grown up watching Maria treat every member of the household with warmth, and somewhere along the way, he began to notice her, not as staff, but as a person with more grace and integrity than anyone else in his life. Maria never overstepped. She kept her head down, did her work, and went home to her son every night with tired feet and a full heart. She wasn't chasing anything. She didn't dream of being swept away into a different life. All she wanted was to give Diego a better future than the one she'd had. But everything in that house began to shift the day Nathaniel got engaged. Her name was Victoria Sinclair, poised, photogenic, the daughter of a hotel magnate, exactly the kind of woman everyone expected Nathaniel to marry. She was elegant in every room she walked into, always dressed like she was on her way to a magazine cover shoot, always smiling for the cameras. To the outside world, Victoria was the perfect fiancée. But Maria saw something the cameras never caught. She saw the way Victoria's smile vanished the second the front door closed. She saw the way Victoria spoke to the household staff, sharp, dismissive, like they were furniture that occasionally needed adjusting. She saw the way Victoria's eyes would linger on Nathaniel a little too long when he spoke kindly to Maria, like she was measuring a threat she couldn't quite name. Maria never said a word. She wasn't the type to gossip, and she certainly wasn't the type to imagine herself in Victoria's shoes. She had no such intentions. But intentions, as Maria would soon learn, don't always matter to someone who's already decided you're in their way. Started small. A missing bonus that HR claimed was processing. A schedule change that suddenly had Maria working weekends she used to spend with Diego. Little cruelties dressed up as decisions, for the good of the household. Maria absorbed each one quietly. She needed this job. She couldn't afford to make waves. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, Maria collapsed in the kitchen. She had been feeling unwell for days. Dizziness, chest tightness, a cough that wouldn't quit, but she'd pushed through it, telling herself it was exhaustion, telling herself she couldn't afford to see a doctor, telling herself Diego needed her to keep working. When she hit the tile floor, one of the other staff members screamed for help. Nathaniel was the one who came running first. He carried her to his own car himself, refusing to wait for an ambulance, driving faster than he should have toward the hospital. his hands trembling on the wheel in a way his employees had never seen. Maria was diagnosed with a severe case of untreated pneumonia that had progressed dangerously. Her lungs were struggling, her oxygen levels dropping. The doctors said if she had waited even one more day, it could have been fatal. Nathaniel didn't just pay her medical bills. He had her moved into a private recovery room in his own family's residence, insisting his personal physician monitor her around the clock. He told the staff in front of everyone that Maria Alvarez was to be treated like family, that her son Diego would be looked after, that her job would always be waiting for her. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for Maria in years. And it was the moment Victoria Sinclair decided Maria Alvarez had to disappear from that house, one way or another. Victoria stood in the doorway of that recovery room the first night, watching Nathaniel adjust Maria's oxygen mask with his own hands, watching the tenderness in his eyes, and something cold settled behind her perfect smile. She said nothing. She simply turned, walked back to her room, and began to plan. Nobody in that house had any idea what Victoria was capable of. Not yet. The wedding was in 17 days, and Victoria had never smiled so much in public, or planned so quietly in private. To the outside world she was radiant. Magazine spreads called her the bride of the year. Charity events wanted her face on their invitations. She played the role flawlessly, gliding through galas on Nathaniel's arm, laughing at all the right moments, touching his shoulder for the cameras like she adored him more than anything else on earth. But behind closed doors, Victoria was unraveling. She had grown up being told over and over that love was a transaction, that a woman's value was measured by what she could secure, not by what she could give. Her own mother had drilled it into her since childhood. Marry up, marry smart, and never, ever let anything threaten what you've built. Victoria didn't see Nathaniel as a partner. She saw him as a prize she had worked years to win, a symbol of the life she believed she was owed. And now a maid, a housekeeper with a bus pass and a kid in public school, was making Nathaniel look at someone else with a kind of tenderness he had never once shown Victoria, not even on the night he proposed. It wasn't jealousy in the way people usually think of jealousy. It was terror. Victoria was terrified that everything she'd built, the engagement ring, the wedding plans, the future headline that would read "Sinclair marries Whitmore," could crumble because Nathaniel's heart had quietly wandered somewhere she couldn't control. She began watching Maria's recovery room from a distance, learning the schedule of the private nurse, learning when Nathaniel would be in meetings, learning the exact minutes when the room would be empty except for Maria, sedated, weak, and completely unaware of the danger circling her. Victoria told herself it wasn't really about hurting Maria. She told herself it was about removing a variable. She told herself a lot of things in those 17 days. The way people do when they're trying to talk themselves into becoming someone they used to believe they'd never be. On the 12th night, she made her decision. Meanwhile, Maria had no idea any of this was happening. She was fighting her own quiet battle, fighting to breathe steadily, fighting to get strong enough to go home to Diego, who called every night from his aunt's house asking when Mommy was coming back. Maria would smile through the oxygen mask and whisper that she'd be home soon, baby. Just a little longer. She trusted this house. She trusted Nathaniel's kindness. She had absolutely no reason to believe that somewhere down the hallway, a woman in designer heels was rehearsing exactly how she would walk into that room unnoticed. Nathaniel, for his part, had begun to feel something he didn't fully understand yet. A pull toward Maria that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with the quiet, unshakable dignity she carried even while flat on her back in a hospital bed, apologizing to the nurses for being a bother. He found himself checking on her more than protocol required. He found himself thinking about her when he should have been thinking about seating charts and floral arrangements. He hadn't said anything to anyone. He barely admitted it to himself. But Victoria had already seen it. And Victoria had already decided what she was going to do about it. On the night of the wedding rehearsal dinner, While Nathaniel gave a toast to his future in-laws in the grand dining hall downstairs, Victoria slipped away from the party, telling everyone she needed a moment to freshen up. She did not go to freshen up. She walked down the east hallway, past the security camera she had quietly asked maintenance to temporarily service that afternoon, toward the private recovery room where Maria Alvarez lay sleeping, her oxygen line humming softly in the dim light. In her hand, hidden inside a small clutch that matched her rehearsal dinner dress, Victoria carried a pair of surgical scissors she had taken from the medical supply cart earlier that day. She told herself this was the only way. She had absolutely no idea that Nathaniel, mid-toast, would suddenly feel an inexplicable unease settle over him, the kind of feeling you can't explain but can't shake either, and quietly excuse himself from his own rehearsal dinner to check on the one person in that house who had never once asked him for anything. The hallway was silent except for the soft click of Victoria's heels against the marble floor. She reached the recovery room door and paused for just a moment, her reflection catching in the glass. Flawless hair, a red dress no one at that party would ever forget, and an expression that, for just a second, didn't look like a bride-to-be at all. It looked like someone standing at the edge of a decision they could never take back. She pushed the door open. Maria was asleep, her chest rising and falling with the help of the oxygen line. A photo of Diego propped on the nightstand beside her bed, the last thing she looked at before drifting off each night. The room was warm, dim, peaceful. It was the kind of room where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Victoria crossed to the bedside table, set down her clutch, and pulled out the scissors. Her hand was shaking, but her jaw was set. She told herself this was just about adjusting something, that maybe if the line was compromised just slightly, maybe if there was a medical complication, maybe Maria would need to be transferred elsewhere, somewhere far from this house, somewhere far from Nathaniel's softening eyes. She wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Fear does that to people. It convinces them that the unthinkable is somehow reasonable, if you frame it the right way in your own head. She reached for the oxygen tubing. At that exact moment, Nathaniel stepped through the door. He had left his own rehearsal dinner without an explanation, walked the length of the East Wing with a growing sense of dread he couldn't name, and now stood frozen in the doorway of Maria's recovery room, watching his fiancée, dressed for their wedding rehearsal, scissors in hand, reaching toward the one thing keeping an innocent, sleeping woman alive. For a moment no one moved. No one breathed. "Victoria!" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a gunshot. Victoria spun around, scissors still in her grip, and for the first time in 6 years of knowing her, Nathaniel saw something in her face that had nothing to do with the woman he thought he was marrying. It wasn't panic exactly. It was the look of someone who had been caught mid-fall, already knowing there was no way back up. "Nathaniel, this isn't what it looks like. Put it down." His voice shook now, not with fear, but with a fury so quiet and so cold it was almost worse than shouting. "Put it down, Victoria." Maria stirred at the sound of raised voices, her eyes fluttering open just enough to see two blurry shapes near her bed, just enough to hear fragments of a conversation she couldn't yet understand, just enough to feel her heart rate spike on the monitor beside her. Victoria set the scissors down slowly, her hands trembling, her carefully constructed composure cracking apart in real time. I thought the line looked twisted. I was going to fix it. I swear to you, Nate, I would never." "Don't." Nathaniel stepped fully into the room now, positioning himself protectively near Maria's bed, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Don't you dare lie to me right now." "Saw you." "I saw exactly what I saw." The commotion had drawn attention. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. The private nurse, rushing in to check on her patient, immediately noting the spiked heart rate on the monitor and the scissors sitting ominously on the nightstand. Behind her, 2 more guests from the rehearsal dinner appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices, their faces shifting from confusion to shock as they took in the scene. the bride-to-be, pale and shaking, standing beside a hospital bed with surgical scissors inches from where they'd just been resting near an oxygen line. Maria, now more awake, looked up at Nathaniel with wide, frightened eyes, still not fully understanding what had almost happened to her while she slept. "Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice hoarse behind the mask. "What's going on?" He looked down at her, and something in his expression softened instantly, the fury still burning but now wrapped around something gentler, something protective. "You're safe," he said quietly. "I promise you're safe now." Then he turned back to Victoria, and the room went silent again, waiting for what he would say next. A silence so heavy it felt like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting to see if the truth would finally come out after all these years of Victoria's smiling mask. It was about to. The rehearsal dinner guests were still filing in behind the nurse, drawn by the commotion, and Victoria realized with a sinking horror that there was no version of tonight where this stayed quiet. "Everyone please," she started, forcing her voice into something calm, something reasonable. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." Nathaniel's voice cut through the room, steady now, the shock giving way to something harder. "I watched you reach for that line, Victoria, with scissors in your hand, while she was asleep." A woman near the door, Victoria's own mother, who had rushed upstairs after hearing the noise, pressed a hand to her mouth. "Victoria, tell him that's not true. Tell him." But Victoria said nothing because for the first time in her adult life, there was no smooth explanation waiting on her tongue. The silence stretched, and in that silence, the truth began doing what truth always eventually does. It started speaking for itself. The head of household security arrived minutes later, alerted by the maintenance log showing the east hallway camera had been serviced that very afternoon at Victoria's personal request. A request with her signature on the work order. It was a small detail, the kind of thing she'd assumed no one would ever think to check. But security always checks, especially in a house like this one, especially when something feels wrong. Nathaniel stood at Maria's bedside as the pieces assembled themselves in real time. The disabled camera, the missing bonus payments that HR had quietly misplaced, under Victoria's direct instruction months earlier, the sudden schedule changes that always seemed to push Maria into longer, harder hours right around the time Nathaniel had started showing her more kindness. It wasn't just one impulsive moment in a dim hospital room. It was the final act of something that had been building for weeks. Maria, propped up now, oxygen mask lowered slightly so she could speak, looked between Nathaniel's furious face and Victoria's crumbling composure, and felt something twist painfully in her chest that had nothing to do with pneumonia. "I never did anything to her," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I never wanted any of this." "I know," Nathaniel said, kneeling beside her bed so he was at eye level with her. "I know you didn't." Victoria's mother turned on her daughter now, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "What have you done? Do you understand what this looks like? Do you understand what this is?" "I panicked," Victoria finally said, tears spilling down her face, though it was unclear even to herself whether they were tears of guilt or tears of a plan collapsing beyond repair. "I was scared I was losing him. I was scared of her. Of what I saw happening. I wasn't going to actually hurt her. I just wanted her gone from this house. I just wanted things back to how they were supposed to be." Supposed to be. Nathaniel stood, and for the first time that night, his voice rose. "You think almost suffocating a sick woman in her sleep is some kind of solution? You think that's who you are, Victoria? Because I don't think I ever really knew who you were at all." The security chief, a serious, steady man named Marcus who had worked for the Whitmore family for over a decade, stepped forward. "Sir, given what we're seeing here, the disabled camera, the intent, the physical evidence, I have to recommend we involve the police. This isn't something the family can just handle internally." Victoria's face went white. Nathaniel, please. Think about my family's name. Think about what this will do. I am thinking, Nathaniel said quietly, about the woman in this bed who trusted the people in this house to keep her safe while she was too weak to protect herself. That's what I'm thinking about right now. The rehearsal dinner downstairs had gone eerily quiet, guests whispering among themselves as word spread through the house like wildfire. The wedding planner, still holding a folder of seating charts for a ceremony that was 17 days away, stood frozen in the hallway, unsure what to do with the paperwork in her hands now that the bride at the center of it all was standing in a recovery room being confronted about something that sounded, from the fragments drifting into the hallway, almost unbelievable. Maria reached out and gently touched Nathaniel's arm. Please, she whispered. Don't let this become bigger than it needs to be because of me. I don't want trouble. Nathaniel turned to her, his expression softening instantly, the anger still simmering beneath the surface but something gentler rising above it. Maria, this was never about you causing trouble. This is about someone trying to hurt you because of the kind of person you are. That's not something I'm going to look away from. Not this time. Not ever. Victoria, watching this exchange, watching the tenderness in his voice when he spoke to a housekeeper he'd known for a fraction of the years he'd known her, finally understood something she had been too afraid to admit to herself for months. She had already lost him. The scissors on the nightstand hadn't caused that. They had simply revealed it. The police arrived just after midnight. By then, the rehearsal dinner had emptied out entirely, guests slipping away in stunned silence, whispering into their phones, already knowing this story would be impossible to keep contained. Victoria sat in the study downstairs with her mother and a lawyer the family had called in a panic. Her wedding dress still hanging upstairs in the guest suite, untouched, waiting for a wedding that everyone in that house now understood would never happen. Maria, meanwhile, was moved to a proper hospital for observation, both for her pneumonia and, at Nathaniel's insistence, for a full evaluation to make sure nothing had actually been compromised with her oxygen line before he'd walked in. The doctors confirmed she was safe. The line hadn't been cut, only threatened, but the fear in the room that night lingered in a way medicine couldn't touch. Nathaniel rode in the ambulance with her, holding her hand the entire way, saying very little, because there wasn't much left to say that the silence between them didn't already understand. You didn't have to come, Maria said softly at one point, her voice still weak. You have a house full of guests and a lawyer and a mess to clean up. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, Nathaniel said, and he meant it with a certainty that surprised even himself. Maria looked away, toward the ambulance window, watching the city lights blur past. I don't want to be the reason your life falls apart, Nathaniel. I never wanted any part of this. You're not the reason anything fell apart, he said firmly. Victoria did that all on her own. You didn't do anything except exist and get sick, and be kind to people in a house that apparently made someone feel threatened by kindness. None of that is your fault. None of it. Maria didn't respond right away. 6 years of keeping her head down, of never letting herself imagine a different kind of life, of protecting her heart because she had a son depending on her and no room for foolish hope. All of it sat heavy in her chest as she listened to Nathaniel Whitmore, of all people, defend her with a ferocity she had never once expected to receive from anyone, let alone from him. Diego's going to ask about all this, she finally said. The news vans are probably already outside the estate. He's 8. He watches the news with his aunt sometimes. Then we'll figure out what to tell him together, Nathaniel said. If that's okay with you. Maria turned to look at him then, searching his face for any sign that this was pity, that this was guilt, that this was simply a wealthy man doing damage control after a scandal involving his own household. She found none of that. What she found instead was something steadier, something that had clearly been building quietly for longer than either of them had let themselves admit. Back at the estate, Victoria's world was unraveling in real time. The story had already leaked. Someone among the rehearsal dinner guests had posted a vague, alarming message online before security could contain it, and by morning, Whitmore wedding scandal was trending locally, then nationally, as details trickled out through unconfirmed sources. Victoria's lawyer advised her to say nothing publicly. Her mother sat beside her in stony, humiliated silence. The family name she had spent decades protecting now attached to headlines neither of them could control. Victoria, staring at her own reflection in the study window, barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Makeup smudged, wedding dress forgotten upstairs, scissors confiscated as evidence, engagement ring still on her finger though she suspected it wouldn't be for long. She thought about every choice that had led her to this room, this night, this exact moment of ruin. She thought about how easy it would have been to simply let Nathaniel's heart go where it was going to go anyway, to walk away with her dignity instead of losing everything trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through her fingers. But it was too late for that kind of clarity now. The following weeks brought a kind of scrutiny Victoria had never experienced in her carefully managed life. Criminal charges were filed, attempted assault and reckless endangerment, according to the police report, based on the physical evidence, the disabled security camera, and Nathaniel's eyewitness account. Victoria's lawyer negotiated fiercely, and eventually, given the lack of any actual physical harm and Victoria's clean record, a plea deal was reached. Probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and a restraining order barring her from the Whitmore estate and from any contact with Maria or her family. It was, by most accounts, a lenient outcome. But for Victoria, whose entire identity had been built on image and status, it was a complete collapse. Her engagement was over, publicly and humiliatingly. Her family's social standing, so carefully cultivated over decades, took a hit that would take years to repair, if it ever fully did. The wedding that was supposed to be the crowning achievement of her life became, instead, a cautionary headline that strangers debated in comment sections for weeks. Maria, meanwhile, was recovering, physically from the pneumonia, and slowly, in a different way, from the fear of what had almost happened to her while she slept. She went home to Diego as soon as the doctors cleared her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself simply rest, surrounded by her son, her sister, and a quiet sense of safety she hadn't fully realized she'd been missing. Nathaniel checked on her constantly, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely couldn't stay away. He'd show up at her small apartment with groceries, with Diego's favorite comic books, with nothing more complicated than his presence and his attention. He never pushed her, never rushed anything, understanding instinctively that Maria needed time to trust that this new gentleness in her life wasn't going to disappear the way so many good things in her past had. "You don't have to keep doing this," Maria told him one evening, watching him help Diego with a science project spread across her small kitchen table. His tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up, looking more at home in her cramped apartment than he ever had in his own mansion. "I know I don't have to," Nathaniel said, not looking up from the volcano model he was helping Diego glue together. "I want to." Diego, oblivious to the weight of the moment, grinned up at Nathaniel. "Are you gonna marry my mom?" "Diego." Maria's face went red instantly. Nathaniel laughed. A real, unguarded laugh, the kind Maria had rarely heard from him even in 6 years of working in his house. "Ask me again in a few months, buddy. Let's get this volcano finished first." It was a small moment, an ordinary moment, the kind of moment that happens in kitchens all over the country every single night. But for Maria, it represented something extraordinary. The quiet, steady possibility of a life she had never allowed herself to imagine, built not on rescue or pity, but on genuine partnership and respect. Back at the Whitmore estate, life moved forward in its own complicated way. Nathaniel gave Maria's position new terms entirely. She would return to work only when she was fully ready, on her own timeline, with a salary that reflected not just her labor but the years of loyalty and integrity she had shown a family that had, for a long time, failed to fully see her. He also made structural changes to how the household staff was treated across the board. Better benefits, protected schedules, an anonymous reporting system for any staff member who felt mistreated by anyone in the family, a system Nathaniel wished bitterly he had put in place years earlier, before Victoria's cruelty toward the staff had ever been allowed to fester unnoticed. It didn't undo what had almost happened, but it was, he hoped, a start. 6 months passed. Maria returned to work at the Whitmore estate, though work had come to mean something different by then. She still managed parts of the household, but Nathaniel had also, gently and without fanfare, helped her enroll in night classes toward the accounting certification she had abandoned years earlier when Diego was born and life had demanded every ounce of her energy just to survive. She studied at the kitchen table after Diego went to bed, sometimes falling asleep over her textbooks, and more than once she woke up to find a blanket draped over her shoulders and a note in Nathaniel's handwriting on the counter. Small, quiet gestures that never asked for anything in return. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, the way trust rebuilds after everything a person has been through. There were no grand declarations, no rushed proposals. Just steady presence, shown up for again and again, day after day, until Maria finally allowed herself to believe it was real. Victoria, meanwhile, had left Charleston entirely, moving to a different city to attempt some version of a quiet, private life away from the headlines that had followed her name for months. Reports suggested she was in therapy, genuinely working through what she had done, though whether that healing was sincere or simply another kind of image management remained something only she truly knew. Nathaniel never spoke of her with hatred, only a kind of tired sadness for the person she might have been if fear hadn't consumed her so completely. "Do you ever miss her?" Maria asked him once carefully, unsure if it was even her place to ask. Nathaniel considered the question honestly before answering. "I miss who I thought she was. But that person was never real. What was real was standing in that room with scissors in her hand. I don't miss that. I don't think I ever really knew her at all." It was Diego, in his own 8-year-old way, who eventually gave voice to the question the entire household had been quietly wondering for months. "Mr. Nathaniel," he said one Saturday afternoon, while the three of them sat on a picnic blanket in the estate's expansive backyard, the same backyard where a wedding had once been planned for a very different bride. "Are you going to ask my mom to marry you for real this time?" Maria nearly choked on her lemonade. Nathaniel just smiled, a slow, genuine smile that had nothing rehearsed about it. "Actually," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I was thinking about asking you first if that's all right with you, since you're the man of the house and all." Diego's eyes went wide. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. "Diego Alvarez," Nathaniel said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level with the same seriousness he'd once used to explain a business merger to a boardroom full of executives. "Would it be okay with you if I married your mom? I promise to take care of both of you, for as long as you'll let me." Diego, grinning from ear to ear, nodded so hard his whole body shook. "Yeah, it is. Definitely yes." Nathaniel turned to Maria, still kneeling, and this time pulled out a ring. Nothing flashy, nothing designed for magazine covers, just something simple and beautiful that he'd chosen entirely on his own, thinking of her and only her. "Maria Alvarez," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I've watched you carry more weight than anyone should ever have to carry alone, and you did it with more grace than I've ever seen in my life. I don't want you to carry anything alone again. Will you marry me?" Maria, tears streaming freely now, looked at this man who had once carried her to the hospital himself, who had stood between her and danger without a second's hesitation, who had shown her son more genuine warmth in 6 months than most men show in years. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. Their wedding, when it finally happened the following spring, looked nothing like the one that had almost taken place a year earlier. There were no magazine crews, no 500-person guest list, no wedding planner coordinating seating charts for business associates who barely knew the bride's name. Instead, it was small, close family, a handful of friends, the household staff who had watched Maria's journey with quiet pride over the years, and Diego, standing proudly beside Nathaniel as his best man, wearing a tiny suit that matched Nathaniel's own. Maria walked down a simple garden aisle in a dress she had chosen herself, nothing borrowed from a designer showroom, nothing dictated by anyone's expectations of what a Whitmore bride should look like. She walked toward a man who had proven, in the hardest possible way, that his love wasn't about convenience or image. It was about showing up, especially when showing up was difficult, especially when it meant standing against someone he had once trusted completely. During the ceremony, Nathaniel spoke without notes. His voice occasionally catching with emotion he made no effort to hide. "A year ago, I thought I understood what love looked like," he said. "I thought it was about the right image, the right family, the right expectations. I was wrong. Love looks like someone who works 2 jobs and still tucks her son in every single night. Love looks like someone who thanks the nurses even while she's the one who's sick. Love looks like Maria. It always has. I just didn't let myself see it until I almost lost the chance." There wasn't a dry eye among the small gathering. Even Marcus, the head of security who had first uncovered the disabled camera evidence a year earlier, found himself wiping his eyes discreetly in the back row. Maria's vows were simpler, quieter, but no less powerful. "I spent my whole life believing that being strong meant never needing anyone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You taught me that real strength isn't about carrying everything alone. It's about letting the right person carry some of it with you. Thank you for seeing me, Nathaniel. Not the housekeeper. Not the story people whisper about at parties. Just me. Thank you for seeing me." After the ceremony, as the small group gathered for dinner beneath string lights in the same backyard where Nathaniel had once proposed, Diego stood up unprompted, tapping his little fork against his glass of apple juice the way he'd seen adults do at other celebrations. "I just wanted to say," he announced in the serious, formal tone only an 8-year-old attempting a toast can manage, "that my mom is the strongest person I know, and Nathaniel is really good at building volcanoes, and I'm really happy they're my family now." The whole table burst into warm laughter, and Maria pulled her son into a tight hug, tears and laughter mixing together in the golden evening light. It was, everyone would later agree, the most genuine celebration that estate had ever hosted. Not because of the money spent or the guest list assembled, but because every single person in attendance had watched, up close, exactly how much this particular love story had cost to earn, and exactly how much it deserved to be celebrated. 2 years later, life at the Whitmore estate looked almost unrecognizable from what it had once been. Maria had completed her accounting certification and now managed the finances for the charitable foundation Nathaniel had established in the wake of everything that happened. A foundation focused on protecting domestic workers' rights, funding legal aid for household staff facing exploitation, and providing emergency medical assistance for working families who, like Maria once had, put off seeing a doctor because they simply couldn't afford to. The foundation had already helped hundreds of families across South Carolina, and Maria, once a woman who quietly absorbed every unfairness thrown her way, had become a fierce, visible advocate for workers who had no one else speaking up for them. She testified before a state committee reviewing domestic worker protections, her voice steady despite the nerves, telling her own story not for sympathy, but because she understood better than anyone how silence protects the wrong people. Diego, now 10, had grown into a thoughtful, curious kid who still loved building things. Volcanoes had given way to robotics kits, and Nathaniel had turned one of the estate's unused rooms into a small workshop just for him. Nathaniel never tried to replace Diego's biological father, But he had become, in every way that mattered, exactly the kind of steady, present father figure Diego needed. As for Victoria, her story took a quieter, more complicated turn. After years of court-mandated therapy, she had, according to people who still occasionally crossed paths with her, genuinely begun to reckon with what she'd done. Not just the act itself, but the years of insecurity and fear that had built toward it. She never reached out to Maria or Nathaniel again, respecting the boundaries the restraining order had made permanent, but a mutual acquaintance once mentioned that Victoria had started volunteering with a mental health organization, working specifically with young women struggling with the same corrosive fear of inadequacy that had once consumed her own life. Nathaniel didn't feel triumphant hearing this. He felt mostly a quiet sense of relief that perhaps something good had eventually grown out of something so frightening, that Victoria, too, had found her own difficult path toward becoming someone better than the person who had once stood over a hospital bed with scissors in her hand. But it was Maria's life, not Victoria's, that had become the story people in Charleston still talked about. The housekeeper who almost lost everything, who was nearly harmed by someone consumed with jealousy, and who instead found not just safety, but an entirely new life built on genuine partnership, purpose, and love. Section 10. If you ask Maria today what she remembers most about that terrifying night in the recovery room, she won't tell you about the scissors or the fear, or even the confrontation that followed. She'll tell you about waking up groggy and confused, hearing raised voices, and looking up to see Nathaniel standing between her and danger without a single moment's hesitation, a man who had every reason to protect his own reputation, his own wedding, his own carefully built life, and who chose instead to protect her. That's the moment, she says, that changed everything. Not because it was dramatic, though it certainly was, but because it was the first time in longer than she could remember that someone had looked at her, really looked at her, and decided without hesitation that she was worth protecting. Maria's story is a reminder that kindness and integrity are never wasted, even when they seem invisible to the people who should be paying attention. She never asked for recognition. She never expected anything beyond her paycheck and the dignity of honest work. But the universe, in its own strange and often painful way, eventually recognizes people who quietly do the right thing even when no one is watching. It's also a reminder that fear and insecurity, left unchecked, can turn even the most polished, privileged life into something devastating. Victoria wasn't born a villain. She was shaped by years of believing her worth depended entirely on what she could secure and control. That fear, given enough time and enough silence, nearly cost an innocent woman her life. It's a lesson worth carrying with us. That jealousy unspoken and unchecked can grow into something none of us ever intend, if we let it fester in the dark for too long. And finally, this story reminds us that real love, the kind worth building a life around, isn't about status, image, or what looks good from the outside. It's about showing up. It's about choosing someone again and again, especially when it's difficult, especially when the whole world is watching and expecting you to choose differently. Maria Alvarez went from taking 2 buses across town every morning to raising her son in a home built on genuine love and mutual respect. But if you ask her, the buses never really bothered her. What mattered was that she never stopped showing up with integrity, even when nobody was watching, and eventually, someone who mattered noticed. If this story touched your heart today, I want you to do 3 things for me. First, hit that like button. It genuinely helps stories like this reach more people who need to hear them. Second, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we share stories just like this one every single week. Stories about real courage, real love, and real second chances. And third, share this with someone in your life who could use a reminder today that good things still happen to good people, even after the hardest nights. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.